De immortales. So Dales, I cannot believe it, but on our various platforms, we've hit some significant milestones. At the time of recording this video, on Facebook, we've hit 5,000 followers. On YouTube, a little over 4,500 followers. On Instagram, almost 19,000 followers, and on TikTok, 16,000 followers. We didn't expect this kind of progress to happen so quickly and so soon, and we're just absolutely flabbergasted. We'd love to give back and do a Q&A with you all, and so we've taken your questions posed on various platforms, and we're going to answer those questions here. I tend to be a bit of a yapper, multum loquor, and so as a result, I'm going to try my very best to keep each response to 3 minutes or less, ideally 2 minutes or less. Before we start this video, thank you all again so much for joining us. We're giving priority to the answer to these questions to our patrons on Patreon, who have been magnificently huge supporters of what we do. Without them, I don't think all of this could have been possible. If you want to support us, the link to our Patreon is down below. There, you'll find exclusive benefits like weekly update videos entirely in classical Latin, regular annotation videos, that is videos where we explain texts entirely in Latin, exclusive resources, discounts, and other things that are lock related. And more than anything, you'll find a community of other people similarly minded, excited to learn languages, especially ancient ones. Enough of the plug, let's get to the questions. Question number 1 comes from our patron and user, Neandermagnon. What tips do you have for self-learners for practicing speaking when no one around you speaks Latin? This can be really difficult. It's a very good question. There are 2 things I want to say here. Number 1, yes, even though there's no one around you who speaks Latin, that is no one who lives nearby who can do it face to face, there is the internet. And there are a lot of people who are very interested and willing to speak Latin for free, and some who are willing to do it for a price. And while the quality of those conversations could depend whether or not you do them for free or for a price, if you're looking just for the output practice, practicing the skill of speaking and forming words, it really doesn't matter. Secondly, I'll say you always have you. The purpose of speaking is to find the gaps in our learning and understanding and information. Speaking is not going to make you a better reader per se, but the art of conversation can make you a better reader as you're listening and interpreting messages in real time of other people. And so what I'd recommend is try talking with yourself. See what you are not capable of saying, and then find reading that fills those gaps. Great question. The next question comes from our patron, M. Salve! From someone who loves CI and really believes in it. I'm glad you do, because there's science to back it up. I think there are many interesting questions about the nitty-gritty details of how we learn with it and teach with it. For instance, how do you talk about how to handle difficulty when consuming input? Do you recommend students aim to understand every word just to get to the point of the sentence? It's okay to skip a word here and there. As a learner, what do? Do you make a big distinction between extensive and intensive reading? Do you think the approach should be different with listening as opposed to reading? Wow, these are a lot of questions. I don't know if I can answer all of it in 3 minutes, but I'll try my very best. So really, I let students decide what they feel is best for them. But for the most part, I think that it's really important that they get the general idea and the gist. I'm shooting for comprehension over the actual skill of translation. So it's okay that they skip a word here and there, but it's very important to me to help to train them as to what words are going to be more important for meaning. For instance, you can't really skip verbs. If you skip the meaning of a verb, you're probably going to lose a great deal of the understanding of the sentence. Same thing with a lot of concrete nouns and some prepositions. It's really important to see what words fill meaning. And while every word is important, clearly, I think so, it's not as important for me for them to understand igitur or enim as it is for them to understand gladius for the meaning of the sentence. Meaning has to be the focus. So it's okay for them to skip here and there. There are some students, some people who are like, I need to understand every word. And I try to nourish that as much as I can, as long as it doesn't slow down the rest of the class. If we're doing a group reading activity and they're like, I need to know every single word, I'm like, that'd be a great thing for us to talk about afterwards. And we do, and it's great. As a learner, what do? It depends on the situation. In conversation, I tend to sort of just, let it flow and do my best. If there's something I don't understand, I'll just ask clarifying questions until I do. For reading, I'm okay with reading en masse and then just skipping words I don't understand, and then reading it again later and seeing if I do understand it. And then if I don't understand it after like the 3rd read through, I recognize that maybe I should look it up. I do think there's a big distinction between extensive and intensive reading. Extensive reading is reading tons and tons of things. It is 90% of what we should be doing. We should be reading material that is super, super easy to understand. And then intensive reading is really fun and important too. It's important for us to be sort of investigative in a text, but it shouldn't be the bulk of what we do. 90% extensive, 10% intensive. Do you think the approach should be different with listening as opposed to reading? No. 90% extensive, 10% intensive. It's good to do some intensive listening here and there, but I really think it's important that we also do a ton of extensive listening. I think a lot of people in Latin sort of ignore the listening aspect of it because they're, it's a not spoken language, as people say, which obviously es falsum, but it's really understandable for people to think that, but really, if you listen, you're gonna get better, I promise. So those are some of my thoughts. I hope it was helpful. Our next question also comes from our patron M. Salue. How do you talk about how engaging input is? For instance, do you put a lot of emphasis either in your own learning or with your students in trying to find input that's as engaging as possible? Do you work on finding ways to enjoy or be engaged with text that may not seem at first engaging? Do you work with students to match them to the input that they specifically will love? How much do you think this matters? This is a really great question. So really, it's hard for me to choose something that students will always find engaging. Every student has something they're going to be interested in differently, but good compelling stories are good compelling stories. If I can find a story for them that universally will be interesting, it has some intrigue, it has some twist, it has some plot that they might really love, then I try to choose that. When they do sort of separate reading or separate listening, which I have them do during the week, I have them choose their resource to listen to. Sometimes this is called FVR, free voluntary reading, but I call it Latin flex time because I allow them to do listening during this time as well. I let them choose the resource that they're going to be most interested in. A lot of them love Magisterkraft. Some of them will choose Remtene and other resources like that. Very few of them tend to choose my own resources because they have me in the classroom, so it's not as cool or fun to be like, oh, look, this is so cool. They're just like, oh, I hear you all the time. I want to hear someone else, which is fair. Things that aren't necessarily engaging, I try to see if I can make them engaging. There are some things that just you can't make enjoyable. For instance, chapter 2 of Lingua Latina is perhaps one of the worst chapters in any textbook ever written. Maybe that's a little bit too much, but it's really boring. It's really hard to find that engaging and fun. And so I'm not going to try to make that engaging. I'm just going to be like, listen, guys, these are our vegetables. We are going to eat them, we're going to enjoy them, and then we'll get to the main course, okay? And that usually helps them. That said, I'm looking to create curriculum, and I am currently in the process of creating curriculum that is much more of just enjoying engaging stories. Recently, I've been listening actually to haud from Legentibus, and I can tell you right now, that's one of the most engaging Latin stories I think that's ever been written. It's a beginner story, and I'm hooked. I want to know what happens next. And that's how you have to write your stories. Create intrigue. I don't necessarily want to make students listen to something or engage with something they don't want to, but there's certain things that we all enjoy together and we create little inside jokes. It's just how you do when you have a textbook that isn't that great. I'd love to move on from a textbook, but right now I can't. Great question. Our next question comes from Patreon, our patron M. Salue. How do you feel about SRS, that is spaced repetition system, versus pure input? How much emphasis do you put on it in your own learning or for students? This is a really good question. I think of this as a both and, not an either or. So really, it's important for us to practice memory retrieval activities. Spaced repetition systems can be really good for us to be able to have retrieval, but it also must feel kind of novel. Just rereading or re-listening to the same old thing, for students especially, is boring. For me, it doesn't matter. I can do that forever. I reread Lingua Latina per se illustrata like 40 times. I've listened to the first Catalinarian like 40, 50 times at this point, perhaps more. I listen to podcasts in Latin that I've already heard 30 or 40 times. That doesn't matter to me. I get excited about them every single time because I enjoy the input, and then I retrieve some things. It's like, oh yeah, that's a construction I haven't read in a while or thought about in a while or used in a while. And that is something I really enjoy. So in my own learning, I do a lot of spaced repetition, but I don't have a specific system that I put in place for it. For students, I try my best to create sort of a template text. It's like a small 5-sentence text with blanks, kind of like Mad Libs, and they had to fill in their own answers in English. And then we read a different one through a spaced repetition system. So like in the first week, we might read one every day. The second week, one every other day. The third week, we might read, only one or two of them at the beginning or the end of the week. And in those are going to be set constructions I want them to internalize. Maybe like quod cum conve niscent, or quod cum fecissent, or quod cum we dissent, for instance, or illo vis, or some other construction of this sort. So I will develop sort of a script that they can put things into. I got this idea from Justin Slocum Bailey. I'd love to say that I came up with it myself, but that allows them to get a combination of both input and spaced repetition system together. Like I said, in my own learning, I don't really use flashcards. I don't find them to be terribly useful. Not a lot of the research says they're very useful, but memory retrieval is useful. So I'll listen to podcast things that I haven't listened to in a long time, or I'll or I'll read a work I haven't read in a long time. For instance, the other day I sat down with the third Catilinarian that I haven't read in a very, very long time, and I was like, oh wow, this is a delight to read. Or the other day I also read through Seneca's first letter, which I've read like 1 billion times, but I was like, you know what, let's just give it another read. And there were some things that I was like, oh yeah, I have to sort of like retrieve this from my memory to make sure that I understand this super, super well. Hope that makes sense. Our next question comes from our patron M on Patreon. Salve! In general, what do you think students struggle with the most when they first learn how to learn languages with CI, and what do you think helps them the most? Ooh, this is a really great question? This is a really great question. Sorry about that. I think the biggest struggle is breaking them of the habit of translation. They have tried their entire lives, if they've learned languages, I teach them in high school, even in middle school this is a thing, is to break them of the habit of feeling the need to translate it just to make sure, is to break them of this security issue that they have. And this issue is an education issue in general. I would love to say that it belongs to languages only, but really their entire lives they've been taught to get the right answer. And in language learning, there is no get the right answer. There's a lot of internalization and acquisition that happens that is just like, it's less concrete than that. It's a little more wishy-washy, and people don't like wishy-washy. So I have to break them of that habit of them translating everything. And it takes about a month, but they get used to it, and that's fine. What do I think helps them the most? They love it. They feel capable and strong. Oftentimes later on, they'll hit something more advanced. They'll be like, wow, I feel like I really don't know anything. And then I'll remind them of what they do know, or show them an easier text or something, or show them something a little bit easier. And then they'll remind them what they do know. Really, it's about building confidence. Like 90% of language learning is building good confidence so that people are willing to try to make output, as well as building strong, safe linguistic communities inside your classrooms. And it's something we believe obviously at Locke, but creating strong, safe linguistic communities means that people are willing to take risks and things. It means they're going to try their best to do something that might be more difficult or outside their comfort zone. Being a language learner means being comfortable with being uncomfortable. And that's something that they struggle with, but also once they learn it, helps them a ton. Our next question comes to us from our patron on Patreon, Olav M. Salve! What is the most beneficial, to read lots of one author or lots of locos from various authors? Congrats! Well, first of all, thank you so much. Ooh, what is most beneficial? This is a really difficult question. I think it depends on your goals. I think that there's something to be said for getting used to an author's style and their vocabulary choices and so on and so forth, and using that to read a lot of work. And there's also something to be said for reading variously. I mean, if we were going to follow the advice of Pliny, right, maybe we should legere multum non multa. And it was Seneca who said that we should, fugare libros multos et just quaere libros bonos. Look for only good books and don't worry about many books. But I think that we benefit from both in different ways. So reading a lot of one author means that you're going to get to know that author very well, their style, internalize what they do, and have expectations of what's going to come next, which is super important in language learning. But also, it can be boring to read just one author, and also it gives us a sort of narrow view of what Latin can be. The thing that's really wonderful and magnificent about Latin is that it's 2,700 years old, right? We have various pieces of writing, whether inscription or literature, from 2,700 years ago up to now. And so there's something really wonderful also about reading very widely and diversely and seeing what other people have to say about things. So both are beneficial. I guess it just depends on for what. If you're looking for language learning, I think maybe it might be better to read lots of one specific author, but it can also be boring and also give us a narrow scope on what it means to know that language or whatever. I personally, like when I found a podcast that I liked, I listened to a ton of that podcast, and then I found the next one and I listened to a ton of that podcast rather than listening to a bunch every so often. And I found that helped me, but it really also depends on your personality. I don't think either one is specifically better for language learning necessarily. If I had to pick one, it'd probably be the former. That one I think would be better for language learning, but both of them have immense boons. This is a really good question though. I find myself wrestling with it even in my answer, as you can hear. But I don't know, read a lot. That's definitely the most important thing. Whether it's various authors or one author, reading a lot is definitely the best. Our next question comes from one of our biggest patrons, Graham Shepper, who also has his own YouTube channel. Check him out. He'll be linked below. What is the most interesting Latin text that you feel like most people don't talk about or read? Oh my goodness, how long do you have? I only have 3 minutes, so I'm going to give you one of my top answers, and that is De Orthographia by Flavius Caper. Flavius Caper was a Roman grammarian of the 2nd century AD. And this Roman grammarian wrote only really 2 works that come down to us, one of which is the De Orthographia, about writing correctly. When we talk about orthography in English, we're often talking about the actual handwriting, but orthography in the ancient world was how you write correctly. And this thing is, one, hilarious, I find. It's essentially a list of mistakes that people are making and what you should say instead, and they all sound like little tweets. Like, oh, you shouldn't be saying this, you should be saying this, loser, right? Or this is something that we can choose, this is something we should make fun of. And what's really fascinating about this is that having a prescriptive linguistic manual from the ancient world tells us what other people were saying in the common streets, right? What the common folk were saying. If he's trying to correct someone, then that means we know what people were trying to say wrong, which is really cool. I'm not a person that is prescriptive in my linguistics. I'm a descriptive linguist. I like describing how people talk about things, but prescriptive linguistics nonetheless still gives us sort of a window into what people thought was right. So De Orthographia by Flavius Caper is such a treat to read. And also it gives you some of those discrimina verborum that we're always looking for, the differences in words. And it's a really, really cool work. I cannot recommend it enough. Our next question comes from Instagram from Hi Maxia. Love your efforts. Congrats. Thanks. Please speak about your background, why Latin is still important, about your pronunciation. At least in German schools, Latin is mostly pronounced as you read it. Of course, for beginners, it is easier this way, but it doesn't have the ring of an actual language this way, I think. This is a really great question. I'll try to be a little bit brief about this because I could go on forever about my background to a certain degree because there's a lot of it. But I'll say this, I went to high school, learned Latin from 9th grade. I did grammar translation for 9 years, wasn't very good at Latin, even though I was very good at grammar translation. I wasn't as capable in Latin as I am now. What took me, it took me an hour maybe to read 75 lines of Latin. Now in that amount of time, I can read pages, many pages. That was something that I did, but I went to UMass Amherst, got my bachelor's, I got my master's in arts and teaching, so I had know a lot about the language also, and I didn't have an actual official minor, but I spent a lot of my time also doing historical linguistics because I really fell in love with Latin as a language before I fell in love with anything else. I think it's still important today because there's very, very few languages in the world that encapsulate so much of human experience over such a large swath of time. Latin, as I already said, has existed for 2,700 years. And throughout those 2,700 years, we have narrations, we have treatises, we have letters, we have all types of written experiences from people all over the world. Obviously, primarily in Europe, but also there are some treatises we have of other people writing in different places, most of them from European background. But really, it's just an encapsulation of diachronic human experience, which I think is deeply fascinating. And I think that in itself has value. I don't think the value that people purport about like, oh, it's in law and medicine and all those things, I don't think those things are valuable. And I don't think those things will sell Latin. It might get you in the door, but I don't think it's going to sell Latin. What people feel, what people feel like, what people experience, that is what sells something. Even if you look at marketing for Coca-Cola, no one buys Coca-Cola because they're like excited for the taste of Coca-Cola necessarily through the marketing ads. They're selling an experience. They're selling Americana. They're selling the feeling that you get when you drink a Coca-Cola, refreshing, right? So anyway, that's that. About pronunciation, I use a restored classical pronunciation. I am not perfect. No one is perfect. Trying to be perfect is a waste of time, but I try my very best to model what would be a restored pronunciation of classical Latin. Our next question comes from Facebook. I unfortunately cannot read the person's name as it's written in Arabic script, but it looks beautiful and I'm sure it sounds beautiful. What should I start with first in my Latin learning journey, and what should I do next? What you should do next, I don't know, but I think you're asking for starting and then after that. So this is a really good question. First of all, I'd recommend taking one of our classes at LAC. We have winter classes that are live right now, and we use right now Lingua Latina per se illustrata familia romana for teaching people in the very beginning for Latin learning. While this book does have its problems, it is right now perhaps the best resource we have for Latin learning. Reading that from cover to cover will make you a better Latinist. It's just true. Even if you already know Latin, I guarantee there's something in there that's still going to be beneficial for you. It was well curated, it was well written. Even if there are things in it that I don't like, that's beside the point. It's still a good place to start. And then after that, you should choose another beginner textbook series. Cambridge Latin course, Oxford Latin course, one that's based on reading. You should choose another beginner one that's based on reading and read all that. And then find another one and read all that. And then find another one and read all that. Via Latina, great book. Read all that. Read all those things from beginning to end, cover to cover. Read a butt ton. Also, you should be listening to Latin podcasts. Colloquia Facilia from us at Latinitas Animi Causa, as well as Remtene, are two really great podcasts for beginner and intermediate learners for them to get going in their Latin learning journey. Also, you can obviously follow us on YouTube, where you can find other resources for your Latin learning journey that will be good as well. I don't think you should waste your time in grammar in the beginning. You can learn some grammar later. You'll be expected to know it no matter where you go. Most people know Latin based on its grammar, but you really should be focusing on meaning and reading and listening as much as humanly possible. Find it, read it, listen to it, move on to the next one, and then go back to that other one. Once you finish Familia Romana, read Familia Romana again. Once you finish Via Latina, read Via Latina again. If you listen to all the episodes of Remtene, listen to them again, and so on and so forth. Our next question comes from Tim Lizinski on Facebook. Quaes volacitas en aere hi rundinis sine honore? Jasne European Africana. I don't know that. Our next question comes from Facebook from Natasha Berriman-Gagnon. Salve. Do you have any place that has English translations for what you're saying? Not all the things, no. Really, English translations are going to do more to hold you back than they will to help your learning. If you're always looking for a translation, you're always going to be stuck on trying to find the exact meaning for words rather than trying to deduce them from context and use your input skills. Consuming input, it's important to understand what's going on, but to also let go of needing to understand every single aspect of every single word and every single thing. If you feel like you need English translations for something you're listening to, reading, whatever it might be, it probably means that resource is too difficult for you and you should find something that's a little bit easier. And that's okay. No shame in that. But in general, we don't really do a lot of English translations. One, they're time consuming. Two, they're not that beneficial for your language learning. Anything we do have is available on our Patreon page. You can find it down below. If you subscribe, Huxide's tier up, you can get access to translations for things that we give for. Our next question comes from YouTube. I like being 6776. 6-7. How can one bring their graded reader Latin or Greek capability to real texts? I can read something predictable like LLPSI. I can understand spoken Latin very well too, but real texts are much harder and they get tiring to process much faster. This is a really good question. Really, that's where we find the biggest difficulty. In Latin, we have a lot of stuff that's super easy. We have a lot of stuff that's super hard and not a lot in the middle. Usually I recommend to people that they read medieval Latin. There's a ton of it. There's way more. There's like, of all the Latin we have, 1% of it is classical. The rest is medieval and Renaissance. And those texts can be much, much easier to read. Because one of the difficulties in reading something ancient and authentic is not only the language, but also the cultural literacy and cultural differences that are so significant over time. And so as a result, it can be really, really difficult to understand those things. But going to something like Erasmus that has more predictable things using language we don't yet know, that can help. Or Laura Chireta, or really any sort of Renaissance reader or medieval reader. Going to those would be a good way to move on to the next thing. Also, finding annotated texts for ancient texts would be good. So if you want to find a tiered reader, for instance, or an embedded reader, which are two different things, if you ever want to hear those explained, you can find sort of simplified tiers that lead to the actual real text, and that could be good to read. There's not enough of them for everything, but for instance, The Lover's Curse by Carla Hurt or Erictho by Lupus Alatus, that is Jessica McCormick and Victor Kaplan. Those are two that exist right now that are very, very good for producing that exact thing, allowing you to get access to ancient text. It's difficult. That's all there is to it. Also, finding stuff from the direct method in the 1900s, that is from Appleton and people like that, those often can also be really great bridges to start to get to actual real Latin, as it's called. So I hope that was helpful. There's just nothing but a lot of reading, a lot of listening, and you keep going. Our next question comes from YouTube at eruditus+c. Why don't you add subtitles to the more advanced videos? Because they're long and it takes forever. That's the real reason. And if there's a class of people who have a need for it more than others, it would be those who are just getting into Latin versus those who already know Latin. We did put subtitles on our most recent advanced video, if you haven't noticed, and that one's already performing better, which is an indication of that. Unfortunately, this is not my full-time gig. If it were, I would be adding subtitles to every single thing that we do. Unfortunately, this is not my full-time gig, nor do I have the amount of time that it takes to create all the subtitles. I don't deny that it would be super useful and super beneficial for those who are looking to also get beyond the intermediate and into advanced videos, because we have content of all ranges on our page. We do have beginner, we have intermediate, we have advanced, and we have some reading of text that would be superior and distinguished using actual terms. But it's time. It's time. If this were our full-time gig, we could, but until we get there, we can't. Our next question comes from YouTube at Bakarka. I've wanted to ask an expert. Who, me? A few years ago, I attended a Renaissance music workshop. The teacher presented a Latin text and asked how we might set it to instrumental music. I said what I thought was obvious, that we would want stressed syllables to fall on the strong beats. She shot that down and said there was no stress in Latin. I was dumbfounded, but she was supposed to be an expert. I knew there were other students in the class who knew Latin much better than me, but no one came to my rescue. So I let it slide because I didn't know how to back up my position. But there was never a time in Latin, but was there ever a time in Latin that there was no stress, or maybe I misunderstood her? So this is a really great question. Latin meter is not a stress-based meter. So English is a stress-based meter. If you read Shakespeare's iambic pentameter, the stress is what carries out the rhythm of the iambic pentameter. Latin is not stress-based, but quantity-based. Arma verumque cano, right? The stress of cano is cano. Meter itself wants the stress to be on the o and cano. And actually, this is deliberate by Virgil to create a sort of tension between the idea of cano, which is the stress of the word, and putting emphasis on the o and cano, saying he's the one doing the singing, versus the previous works, Andra moyen pemusa from the Odyssey, and men nae from the Iliad. So there is indeed stress in Latin on words, but meter is not stress-based. And I think that's what your teacher was trying to say, and probably not doing it in a very productive way. But there is stress in words, right? If you say meretrix versus meretrix, those aren't the same word, right? Also, meretrix doesn't exist. But let's do a better example of conditus and conditus. The change in stress changes the meaning of the word. Conditus means founded. Conditus means pickled or somehow preserved in condiment, preserved in spice. There's no stress for the meter in Latin specifically. I'm not, by the way, an expert in prosody, so if anyone has a better answer than I for this, I definitely invite them to do so in the text. But my understanding has always been that because Latin is a quantity-based meter on the vowel, that's what affects the meter as opposed to the stress-based meters of English meters. So I hope that's somewhat clear. And I hope to also provide maybe a more clearer answer in the future. Our next question comes from YouTube. I wish exams never happened asks, will there be an intermediate series like Rem Tene? Well, Rem Tene already technically falls into what is intermediate. I think a lot of us don't have a really clear view. I mean, a lot of us, I'm not talking about just you, but I'm talking about like literally everybody doesn't have a clear view on what is beginner, what is intermediate, what is advanced, and what those things mean depending on what you're doing. Because there are two sort of proficiency guidelines we can follow, the CEFR for Europe and the ACTFL guidelines for the United States. And so Rem Tene is sort of the bridge between those two. It's not an upper intermediate, but it's sort of intermediate already. If you were to look at it within ACTFL guidelines, it sort of falls in, most of the episodes fall into intermediate, lower, intermediate, mid, some of them being novice high. If you looked at CEFR, a lot of them fall sort of into the B1 arena, some of them more A2. Really, a lot of it is already intermediate. That said, it would be fantastic for us to produce a series that's a little more advanced than Rem Tene and less advanced than our series Latinitas, Animi, Causa, that uses sort of Rem Tene's method. I would love to do that. If this were my full-time gig, I would definitely be doing so. Our next question comes from YouTube at Anthony Cepeda 4992 asks, I am trying to improve my Latin comprehension by doing a lot of reading and listening, but my Latin speaking abilities are atrocious. How can I improve my speaking in Latin when there is no one to speak with? Well, I invite you to listen to the answer I gave to Neander Magnon earlier, but also I'll say that your Latin speaking abilities probably aren't as bad as you think they are. Really, a lot of speaking is just a skill. It needs to be exercised. There's a couple of things that go into speaking. One of them is getting your mouth used to creating those sounds. So actually, this is where recitation can come in helpful. Read text out loud to get your muscles used to where the sound should be coming from. You understand. And then the other part of speaking is the extemporaneous part. This is the actual speaking part, right? There's the physical speaking part, getting your mouth muscles used to the sounds that come for Latin specifically. And then there's the extemporaneous production part, right? And this is something that can be very difficult, but really, I recommend trying to talk with yourself, narrate what you're doing, try to do things that you feel capable of doing. Describe trees. It's fine. Haec arbores alta. And you can do that at a very, very basic level, and you can be like, altitudo huius arbores multum cadet a terra ipsa. And that's a more advanced way to say the same exact thing. Really, you can exercise that way. You can have live conversations with people. There are people who want to do it for free on the internet. There are people who want to do it paid on the internet. We obviously do conversational classes at Luck, and I recommend them heavily, but it's really just a nothing to it but to do it. Start with yourself, bridge to others. Our next question comes from YouTube. At Malin Peterson 4182 asks, do you have any advice on how to get back to Latin university studies and revise it after a long break? It's especially syntactic rules in my case, but I'd like to find a more organic way than simply using flashcards on when and how to use different tenses with different subordinate clauses, etc. This emoji. Yes, that's a really great question. So number one, read. Pick up Lingua Latina per se illustrata Famiglia Romana, read it cover to cover. Pick up Via Latina from Cultura Classica, read it cover to cover. Pick up introductory textbook readers and read them from cover to cover. Find the website I recommend is fabulaefaciles.com. It has all the public domains, well, not all the public domain stuff, but a lot of public domain stuff that's being written by hand by one of our supporters, Peter Chamber, Salve Petere, si nos spectas, and he is by hand copying down the stuff that's normally in PDFs and really hard to find and read so that you can read it pretty easily. Read that. It's much more about reading to do it more organically. And then afterwards, you can start watching maybe some YouTube videos on like Latin tutorial or pick up a grammar book if you'd like to. But frankly, grammar is not the obstacle to understanding. It very rarely is, or at least syntax is very rarely the obstacle to understanding. 99% of the time, it's vocabulary. So, and how words are being used in those contexts, semantics. So I recommend wholeheartedly that you just read as much as you can of simple Latin. Find it, read it, love it. Our next question comes from @ValentineGartner3793 on YouTube. Quid censes de Vaticano qui ordinavit ut iam non tantum modo Latine publicaret, non multum censeo hisce de rebus. I'll respond to you in English though. So I don't really think about it a lot. I don't think about the Vatican very much. I know that the Vatican is a huge proponent of Latin, and people see it as sort of a bastion for Latin nowadays, but I don't think about the Vatican very much. I really like reading, so I read ancient texts. Them saying that Latin is not to be used in publications anymore, I think, if I remember correctly, I read a follow-up article about that said that was a little bit overblown, but even if they do, it's just going to provide more access to more people. So I mean, Latin should be used as a tool for communication so that we can get better at reading and understanding texts, and so that we can find joy in the study of Latin and unlock aspects of the passive humanity and so on and so forth. Those are all good reasons to learn Latin. If Latin somehow is a barrier to someone's access, then that's a problem. So that's why, for instance, academic articles aren't published in Latin anymore. In a perfect world, everyone would know enough Latin to be able to do that well, and that would be really great. But they don't. So let's live in the reality we live in, not the one we want to live in. So those are my thoughts. I hope that's not too cynical, but like I said, I don't think about them much. I read and speak Latin every single day with or without them. Our next question comes from us on YouTube @SteelMedaka. Salve mutum. Qui libri vel commentaria reti alia latine conscripta vel tainiolae kinematographicae noscite mihi latine factae vos maxime delectant quae res prosus modernas tractant verbi causa cultum civilem popularum modernum ut exemplum afferam placentne vobis libri Stefani Berardi et alia. Bene, respondebo si per te lecurit anglice non latine quo facilius atque melius intellegatur omnibus spectatoribus. So the question is, what books or internet commentaries written in Latin about modern things do I enjoy most? This is, for instance, do I like the books of Stephen Berard, which I would love to love them, but I've never read them because they're kind of boring. No offense, Stephen Berard, sorry. There's not a lot out there that's happening that's talking about modern stuff. We're some of the only people doing it. It's part of why we do it, because I think that if we're going to keep Latin living like we want it to live, and I don't mean living as in like, I don't want it to come back into usum vivum that we're like using it as the common language for the academy or anything like that anymore. I don't think that's a good use of Latin, but if we're going to see Latin live on like we want it to, we need to be doing things that we personally care about. It's part of why we play video games entirely in Latin. We're connecting something ancient to something modern that we really deeply love, and they're not nugae. We're using classical language to apply it to things that are today to get people excited and interested in something that we're excited about. And the more that we do that, the more we're going to have deep, meaningful communication, because that's what the ancient people were doing. The ancient people were talking about things they were excited about. So there just aren't that many people doing it. Every so often, Satura Langs will put out something like that, and I love those. I love her content. She's a fantastic teacher, wonderful Latinist, and great human being. So Satura Langs, si nos forte spectas, salveto. And every so often also Musa Pedetris and Rumak, Stepanos Vittori. They're also sometimes putting stuff like that out, but there just aren't that many people doing it. I would love more. But Stephen Berard's books, there's too many Graecisms and neologisms for my interest, and I tend to sort of just lose focus and interest after like 10 pages. But it's a fascinating thing. Like I think it's a wonderful thing to have done. I'm just not sure who the audience was, and I can tell it probably wasn't me. But that said, please, folks, put modern stuff together. Like think about like the Iter Subterraneum Nicolae Climii. Like that's a super cool work, and we need more works like that written in Latin, and that'd be super, super cool. So let's do it. Our next question comes from YouTube at the Ovlilos. Sorry if I pronounced that incorrectly. Number 1, is there going to be a video for this Q&A? Ecce. Number 2, how to keep yourself motivated in learning Latin and or Greek when you are not a classic student, especially after having reached the intermediate plateau. For me personally, I'm just kind of frustrated that I only understand the literal meaning of those classical authors, so I can read Latin, but also I can't at the same time. Most of the time, it's like not having read anything. The logic is hard to follow, not to mention the cultural implications are not easy to comprehend. Besides, after an exhausting day of work/study, I'd rather do something fun like watching a TV show or reading a funny comic book instead of reading something about a profound topic, which may sound relaxing for you, but I guess it's definitely not for the majority. However, whenever I try to bring this topic up, there's always a voice in my head telling me that if I don't like reading these stuffs, then perhaps I shouldn't have even started learning Latin in the first place. Intelligisne? Please do not tell me I have picked up the wrong foreign language. I've worked so hard to get here. I'm not giving up. And you shouldn't give up. And listen, different strokes for different folks is what it comes down to, right? You're not wrong. Like, I sometimes come home and I enjoy a Latin book. Most often not. Most often I, like you, come home and I want something light and easy. And that's part of why I sort of come home and play video games in Latin. Because like, I love Latin, I love video games, so I'm going to put the two things I love together. I love creating things in Latin, so I do that sometimes when I come home, because that's relaxing. But indeed, I don't think reading Cicero's De Inventione is exactly the most fun thing to do when I get home. But there are pieces of literature from the ancient world that are maybe more interesting. Or maybe I shouldn't say the ancient world, but like the medieval period. Like, read the Gesta Romanorum. It's pretty funny. Some of it's really messed up, but that's beside the point. Like, finding stories that are really interesting and fun to read, I recommend that. But you're not wrong that it can be really hard, and that's okay. And though reading is ultimately our goal, we also need tons and tons and tons and tons of resources to get us there. These people were writing something difficult in a language they were fluent in. So we should remember that when we're reading these works, and it's okay to struggle with it. And it's okay to not want to read that when you come home. Sometimes when I come home, like just the other day, I came home and I listened to Legentibus reading chapters 24 to 36 of Familia, or 35 of Familia Romana. I did not listen to anything more exciting or important. I listened to Auda today, and I'm almost done with it, and it's so good, by the way. Auda is a story that's written in Legentibus. It's so good. And like, it's made for novice learners. It's not this great, book that I'm supposed to have read, but there's nothing you're supposed to do. It's just something you want to do. So do the things you want, and that's okay. Our next question comes from YouTube at the Ovlilos. Sorry if I pronounced it wrong again. Who's your favorite classical and post-classical Latin authors, if any? I am a boring sod. My favorite classical author is Cicero. I'm sorry, I absolutely love it. I love oratory. I love how well he writes. I love the philosophy that he writes and about how to speak and how to write. I find that deeply fascinating. Love it. That said, I also love Ovid so much. Ovid is a wonderful Latin author. And I just really enjoy the works that he wrote. And I love that he is probably writing more progressively than other Romans of the time might have, which might be a controversial take, and I'm happy to talk about it further if people want to hear about it, but I love Ovid. I think he's so cool. I don't think there's an author that I hate altogether. I find that all of them have something valuable and interesting I want to learn about, but Cicero's my favorite, and maybe that's boring. And post-classical, that's a really great question. I find myself sort of vacillating these days for what I enjoy that's post-classical. And I'm assuming you mean post-classical as in like post-Roman, more or less, because like, you know, post-classical technically could be like post-golden age, depending on how you define these things or whatever it might be. If we're doing like post-golden age, then it's Aulus Gellius without a doubt. He's technically like post-classical, but Aulus Gellius, mwah, amazing author. Absolutely love reading him. Always a gem inside of his work that I absolutely love. But if we're talking about like medieval / Renaissance, like I do love reading Erasmus. I think that he's really fun to read. I love reading Lorenzo Valla, who wrote translations of things in Greek from Greek into Latin. Like he wrote a translation of Herodotus. He wrote a translation of, I think he wrote a translation of Thucydides as well. Someone else did for sure. It might have been him as well. But those are fun to read. I find anything that I can pick up that's in Latin, I'm excited to read about it almost always. So there's that. 3 questions that are coming from the Ovlilos on YouTube. Favorite food? Ooh, difficult. Probably pizza. Because pizza, if done well, obviously, you can have breakfast pizza, you can have pizza for lunch, you can have pizza for dinner. There's even dessert pizza. I don't think I ever turn down pizza. I never see pizza and go like, not today. But really, also, I love a good steak, not gonna lie, but really all kinds of foods. I love really a lot of foods. I love asparagus a lot. I don't know why I do, I just do. I've really gone into broccoli lately, like, and creating things together with that. I don't know if you wanted my favorite types of food, like my favorite, you know, cultural foods or whatever, in which case it's either Italian or Indian. I love Italian food. I love Indian food. I mess with chicken tikka masala. Oh my God. Oh, so good. My favorite sport. I don't know if I have a favorite sport. I don't really watch sports. I mean, when I played sports in school, I like playing any sport. I'll play any sport. I'll learn how to play any sport. I'm a competitive person. I love playing sports. I don't love watching sports. Don't really care to. If I was going to, it'd probably be soccer. And that's just because of Ted Lasso. Ted Lasso got me excited about watching soccer, and I really enjoy it. But there's no actual, like, I don't really have a favorite sport, not gonna lie. Maybe archery. I do archery, but most people don't really count that as a real sport, but whatever. And then your next question, what's the best way to practice speaking in any language when there's no one to speak to? Well, I've already responded to that a couple of times, but really, describe what you're doing. Connect it to something you're excited about. Maybe speak about your favorite television show in Latin to yourself, and then think, what was I capable of saying? What was I not capable of saying? And when you're not capable of saying something, look up things you need to, and then try doing it again. That's a good way to do it. Those are all the questions we have for today. Thank you all so much for joining us for today's Q&A, and we're going to have another one in the future, so don't you worry. Lots of really interesting questions to talk about, lots of really interesting things to do. Again, if you enjoyed this, don't thank us, thank our patrons on Patreon. Without them, none of this would be possible, and we owe them very, very deep gratitude. And we also want to thank all of you who are following us on here. We're excited to be able to create and expand access to the Latin and Greek world, to be able to expand access to ancient resources. It's just an incredible thing to be able to study, and we want everyone to be able to, and we want to make sure that we're following what research tells us is best. And we want to make sure that we're doing so in a fun, effective, and engaging way. So thank you all for being a part of that journey. Until next time, take care.